So I'd like to introduce our two guest speakers here. The first one I want to introduce Rup Singh, and you probably wouldn't know how lucky we are today to get him here until the end of his talk. He's a blockchain innovator or educator, and he has his own TED Talk show on blockchain. And he's very active in the community and with the Georgia State, right? In the Georgia State University and in this whole blockchain field. So the only thing I know about blockchain is I know it's a combination of two words, block and chain. I don't know anything about anything else, so but we'll listen to them. And then the second speaker is Jay Kim. He's an entrepreneur and the founder and president of Augury Square. He asked me to say he happens to be the president of the Korean Chamber of Commerce. So it's very informal, so I'll let them talk, and if you have any questions, feel free to jump in. Okay? All right, take it away.
Thank you. So, okay, all right. So I guess I'll start first. Thank you, everyone, for having us. Thank you, Jan, for inviting me to say a few words. I want to correct a couple things. On the ad, I think it said, I was a blockchain software, expert. I'm not. I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm not in the. I never grew up in the tech space. So just to give you a little background about myself, I got into the mortgage industry back in 2003, and 2008 happened, and my mortgage company went under. My parents were diamond jewelers here. And so I attempted to bring rough diamonds back, and so I went to Africa and bought a small parcel, and ended up selling it here. It got bigger and bigger, and ultimately I had a small cutting factory in Shenzhen, China. My translator in China was a computer programmer, and I used to always ask him what he did, and he mentioned blockchain, and I said, "What is that?" And this is how he kind of introduced blockchain to me. He said it was the next .com era, and but it was actually bigger, and so obviously that got my attention, and so I started diving more and more into it, and then I was stuck. So I don't know too much about the tech side. But I do know my industries, and I wanted to see how I could implement blockchain into the industries that I knew, which was two things: the mortgage industry and the diamond business. And so, when you think of blockchain, the three things the key points, I get bullet points that you think of is decentralized, right? So no one really owns anything. It's distributed, and it's transparent. Transparency, I think, it's very important, in a lot of different sectors. And then it's immutable, so you can't really hack it. You can't, try to fraud the system in any way, shape, or form. So those three things really got to me, and so I started, making some business plans and see how I could implement that, because I think those three things alone could change a lot of different things. It could simplify a lot of industries, not just payments, but anything of value. I think you can implement blockchain. So I wrote a couple of business plans and went to a couple of Georgia Tech professors. One being in the diamond business. I wanted to the problem that I had in while I was living in Africa for 5 years. Was payments. It was hard, when I to buy diamonds. You can't trust the people there. You can't trust the banking system even sometimes. And so this is one of the patent pending technologies that I currently have, but it's taking a little bit longer than I anticipated. Another, industry that I wanted to tap into is I was once in Korea, and the Bank of Korea was actually promoting a coinless society, which I thought was a brilliant idea. And I hate loose change. I don't know about you guys, but pennies, nickels, it's like trash. I mean, you don't really treat that as money, and I think a lot of people, feel the same way. So I wanted to change that concept, right? Because it's money. So I wanted to see if you paid $5 at a McDonald's, and the change back that you wanted to get was maybe $1.23, for example. The 23 cents that you wanted to get back, if I could charge it to my phone, to an app instead of physically receiving it. If you did that, you would save a lot of money. Working on that project, it led me to a lot of different places. And ultimately, I wanted to test the application. So we had it ready to go. But it led me to, I couldn't test it in real life. It was against the law. Because it handled payments. And as you guys know, when you're dealing in payments, you need a certain type of license, right? The professors, being very conservative people, they were like, well, let's test it before we actually get that license. So, I was on another kind of trail, searching what to do, and it led me to Arizona's FinTech Sandbox program, which is the only state, I believe, even till today, the only state in the U.S. that allows you to test the application in a real-life community before you take it to market, which I think is brilliant. But the problem is I don't want to move to Arizona. But I love that concept, and so I took that bill and I hired our law firm, Morris Manning & Martin, which is our attorneys, and now they're working with actually a group to implement this type of law into Georgia. That's when I decided, me and a few team members got together and we wanted to create a smart community. And that's where we are with the Augury Square. So the Augury Square is a development that we've been planning for some time. And it's a community where you can kind of thrive and test your application in blockchain applications in specific, so that before you take it to market. So that's just a little bit about my background. And then the real blockchain expert, I think, is definitely Roop, and he can kind of get into the more details of that. So thank you.
So I won't spend any time talking about myself. Let's talk about things that are more interesting, like blockchain. So who here actually knows what it is? Okay. It's not a surprise, AJ. AJ and I know each other, so it's good to see a familiar face. Anybody else? Have you heard the term? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see you over there. Yes. Have you heard the term? People have heard the term?
Yes.
You think it's all a fad or something fancy that people throw out? It's not real, or it's related to cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, Ethereum. It's just for speculation. It's not anything real that's going to last. Do you think that? Is that a opinion you have of it?
Yeah.
Some people do.
I told you, I only know the block and chain.
So I would refer you to the statement the Chinese president made a few days ago on blockchain. I actually feel there is a lot more interest, enthusiasm, adoption in Asia and in Europe than it is in the US. There's a lot more appreciation, especially in China, of what the technology can do. It is, to me, so here's how we'll structure this talk, so that it can be useful for everybody. I'll talk about blockchain, what it is, ground everybody onto a basic definition that we all can operate from. And then we will talk about what are the potential use cases, how we see the world changing and evolving because of it, or with it. And then we will talk about the challenges that lie ahead, and the risks and challenges, where we stand today in the evolution of this space, and then what risks and challenges lie ahead. and then we'll close out with things you could do yourself, things you could be involved in if there's interest on that side. Does that sound good?
Yep.
And as I go through these sections, feel free to stop me and ask any questions, or you can save this for the end. I'm very interactive. Whatever the group likes, we're here to help you understand and serve you. It's not really for me. So, what is blockchain? Blockchain, simply stated, is a distributed ledger with a shared state. What does that mean? So let's take an example. And I like the fact that we are in a bank. And so suspend your disbelief for a second and think that we are living maybe, I don't know, 500 years ago when banks were just starting, right? So let's say AJ and I are friends and we want to do transactions, and here comes Jay and he wants to do a transaction as well. So there are 3 people involved. Back in the day when there were no banks, how would we do it? We would have a barter system. I could give some currency, whatever was at that time, to AJ. Let's say I gave 20 units to AJ and AJ gave 30 units to Jay. At that time, we would keep a record of those currencies individually. I would have a ledger, very similar to what a spreadsheet looks like today. Maybe, I don't know if paper was invented then, I think it was 500 years ago, right? So I would write on paper, 5 root to AJ, 20, and AJ to J, 30. And then J likes me, he gives me 50, so J to root, 50. This is my ledger. I keep it. Similarly, AJ has his own ledger, and J has its own ledger. That's how we used to do business back in the day. Then banks came around, and the challenge with this system was, well, what if I change my number? I said, no, I gave 40 to AJ. AJ says, no, well, my ledger says it's 20. What's the difference? Who wins? What is the source of truth? Who do we trust? So essentially, this is a trustless system, meaning we 3 parties, we're friends, but we don't trust each other because we have the option or opportunity to change the ledger. Then banks came around and said, okay, don't worry, you guys. Why don't you all give the money to us? We will keep the money. We will be the custodians of your units of currency. And then we will also maintain this so-called ledger. And whenever you want to ask how much money each one of you has, come to the bank and we will tell you how much money you have. Sounds good? So banks became the custodians of trust, or the arbiters of what is this truth of the moment in terms of the transaction between the 3 of us. So leapfrog ahead. Now let's say we try to do that using a blockchain. What does that mean? It means that we can publish the same transactions, not in a bank, but let's say theoretically or metaphorically, on a wall in front of us, this wall. Every time we made a transaction, the 3 of us, we didn't maintain our own individual ledger. We actually published it on a wall in front of us. It's a shared wall, meaning you can look at it, you can look at it, and everybody else who was not even part of that transaction could look at it. Now everybody knows what is the set of transactions in that moment. And it's the version of the truth that we all believe in. So this eliminates the need for, ironically, a bank.
That's okay.
Well, that's the world we live in. So, it's just that I just have to say what it is. So this, what I just described, is somewhat of a metaphorical interpretation of what eventually became Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a peer-to-peer digital currency transaction system that does not involve any third party. I can send money to AJ, AJ can send it to Jay, Jay can send it to me, I can send it to Jihan without a third party. And third party typically in this environment would be a bank or other service providers that are intermediaries for that, right? So if you're getting worried that banks will be eliminated, well, we'll talk about that in a second. So if you look at the base of the technology, it's a distributed ledger, as I explained, but it has a shared state, meaning that we share that state. We can see what the state of the transaction is. Now, this is a very simplistic use case of money or currency in that sense. But this has multiple applications. as a foundational technology. So here's the other part, two parts to blockchain. Distributed ledger that's cryptographically secure. What does that mean? That means that we have secured the shared wall in a way using advanced mathematics, military-grade cryptography, so that other parties cannot come and change the set of transactions. That's an important point, because if let's say you were watching it and you could say, you know what, AJ is my friend, I'm going to change this number over here. That wouldn't work. We wouldn't have trust on this entire system then. So to enable that trust, we secure this metaphorical wall with cryptography so that others could not, even us, could not change. So one of the qualities or powers of blockchain is that once a transaction is committed and it is quote unquote published, it cannot be changed. It is considered to be immutable. It cannot be removed, it cannot be deleted, etc., etc. That is its own power, so to say. So what we've done here is we've taken the power out of my individual ledger, because I could change it, and then put it on a shared ledger, which is cryptographically secure, and it has a shared state that we can all see. So at a very basic level, that's what blockchain is. So if you ever think about, well, it doesn't make sense to me, just go back to these basic building blocks and you will see how the chain builds, no pun intended. So now let's get back to applications of this so-called blockchain. We talked about money or currency. But the fundamental technology, so it is a foundational fundamental technology, as fundamental as the internet was back in the 90s and 2000s, and it will have even a higher or more significant impact. So to me, I actually like to say we are living in an era, let's go back about 1860s, when steam engine was first invented and railroads were first being adopted. So imagine the amount of impact it had on our society in the world. Railways, as we know it, changed how we lived or where we lived, how we traded, who we met, what we ate, what we wore. It changed peace and it changed the nature of war. That is the amount or even greater impact blockchain will have on our society. We're already seeing glimpses of that. Let's talk about use cases quickly. So blockchain can be applied to a number of different use cases, over 50 I could list. Sometimes I play this game called blockchain bingo. You tell me an industry and I'll tell you a use case. So think of the example I gave before, and now think of transactions. Transactions could be anything. It's basically data at the end of the day. So I heard that there are some insurance folks in the room. So blockchain has applications in all kinds of financial services. We talked about loans. We talked about, I think you, sir, talked about proving that you have ownership of a certain asset in a foreign country. If you could prove, this bank will give you a loan. So blockchain can actually help develop a technology that could prove ownership of a certain asset without revealing the details of that asset to either party. That's the critical part.
Oh.
So right now, if somebody says, hey, I have this home, or I have these, 18 homes, you as the loan officer or mortgage officer, you would know those 18 properties. You would know all the details. That's how you are, quote unquote, proving that this person actually has ownership. But with blockchain and cryptography, we can now create systems where we can prove the ownership without a doubt, but we don't have to tell you what that asset looks like. So we protect the privacy of each individual party. I heard insurance. So insurance claims. Even let's back up a little bit. Anything to do with identity, my individual identity, and as such, who am I? Right? Am I my government-issued social security number? Am I my driver's license? Am I my set of assets? Am I my set of my shopping cart on Amazon? What is my identity? That becomes a question in itself. But if you go further, and this is, by the way, this is the topic of my TEDx talk, so feel free to check it out, when I describe the ownership of an individual's identity is a fundamental human right. And we should own our own digital identity, and how blockchain can help solve for that problem. So blockchain can enable all forms of identity, be it your driver's license, be it your bank card, for example. In Europe, they have bank numbers and bank cards. Like each individual has a national bank card, so to say. Or you can think about identity even in terms of your medical records. Right? Today, in America, in healthcare, that's a big mess. My question to you is, you go to a doctor, you change your doctor in 6 months, where are those medical records? Furthermore, who actually owns those medical records? Well, it was yours, right? It was your heart they were checking, or your lung, or your leg, or your eye. Why should somebody else own it? So ownership of medical records, ownership of any form of identity can be enabled through blockchain. Supply chain, that's a very simple, basic example, or very, I wouldn't call it basic, that's not the right term. People get mad at me for that. It's a very apt example. So let's talk about chain of custody of any asset. So what's your favorite fruit?
Watermelon.
Watermelon. So let's say the watermelons are produced in Mexico, for example. They grow in Mexico, but they are then loaded onto a truck, and then they get on, let's take a long route and get on a ship, just even though we don't need to from Mexico, but just for example, let's get on a ship, and then let's even get on a flight, and then let's get to a warehouse outside Georgia, and then let's get to another truck from that warehouse into your local grocery store. That's a set of events that happen. Can we track the watermelon? So, and not only can we track the watermelon, can we trust that data? So in today's world, we have a number of different systems that each individual party may have created. And what we do is we reconcile those systems back. It's not that efficient. So using a blockchain and in fact using IoT, you could now, right from the moment the watermelon is harvested in Mexico, you could track it from the point of origin to the point of consumption. And let's say if you could track watermelon, you could track spinach, you could track tomatoes. Guess what else you could track? You could track fish. It's a very, it's an actual application that I've seen being developed. So fisherman catches fish. There's an AI-based application which takes a picture of the fish and it knows what kind of fish it is. Of the 200 varieties of fish found in that region, you can tell what fish it is. It also records the geographic location, the temperature, all the climatic factors when the fish was captured. It records then when the fish was frozen, because it needs to be frozen to be transported. And it records the entire journey, and it records what happens along the way. Let's say that one of the trucks, the freezer died, and it wasn't cold for the next 5 hours because of this issue. We would know through this data stored on the blockchain that the freezer was not operational during that time. And here's the benefit. You can now share that data with everybody involved, all the 8 partners, so to say, involved in that supply chain. We could share that data immediately and actually trust that data. Why? Going back to the shared wall. Because it's a shared wall that we all trust and believe this is the version of the truth at the moment. We don't have to have each individual databases where we don't have to keep reconciling the state. Right? I can go on and on. So let's stop there for a second and ask you.
So essentially, you can take any business, and this is kind of like how I took this. You can cut out the middlemen. You can take all the information, because like whatever business you're in, and so like for me, I was in I started off in the mortgage business. It's the same information, it's the same application, it's the same 1003, right? And processing and underwriting really essentially is redundant. And so if you put all of this information into a block, use smart contracts and create a platform, you don't have to close in 30 days, 45, and 60 days sometimes, depending on the customer and you're doing the same thing over and over again. But if you could put all that information into a block and use smart contracts, you can save so much money and essentially close a loan in 5 days. No more waiting for 30, 45. So
Yeah.
that's just one industry, but whatever your industry you're in, I think blockchain it's fairly new. It's still new, and we're still kind of playing around with it right now. But it can, like Fruit said, it can be applied into almost everything of value.
So you bring up a few interesting points. The question a lot of times when I talk to CEOs and executives, they say, well, why? Why? Okay, you could do this. It sounds fancy. You're asking me to create this new infrastructure. I already have this infrastructure. Why would I bother? It's a fair question. Why would I invest time, effort, energy, resources? Why? So here's an example that will make sense in this environment. We're in a bank. You guys have heard of things that we still use, I don't know why, called checks. This paper thing that people write on and actually have a physical signature, and you present that check and the banker looks at it 2 ways and sees if your signature matches, right? So if you've had this experience of actually depositing a check, it takes, 3 to 4 days for a check to clear. Well, it used to, at least in India it does.
24 hours, it's scanned now.
Okay, so we're getting better from 3 to 4 days, so now we're at 24 hours, right? Here's what blockchain could do for you. If you look at a blockchain-based bank-to-bank payment settlement network called Ripple, Ripple designed a blockchain network and then got, at the moment, I would say over 100 banks to adopt it globally. If you're on that network, which is very similar to the SWIFT network the banks use today, if you're on that network, you could clear a bank-to-bank settlement from 4 days coming to 24 hours. You can clear it in 4 seconds. Ripple. So the idea behind that is faster, better, unless it's giving you a transformative improvement over current state process. I don't think you should apply any new technology, especially blockchain. But if it does allow you to have that transformational improvement, then there is some value. Yes?
So a lot of my questions are going to come out of my ignorance of all the
No, please
technology.
feel free. Yes.
But then, so back to the question about bank money transfer. So one big debate right now, I think, involved with blockchain, especially in financial services implementation, is about how it's not a free money transfer system because every country want to implement AMLs and also drug dealerships, right? Money laundering. So, but then with the open system, anyone can transfer money to anybody and hide their identity. How you solve that problem? I mean, it's the opposite kind of idea. You're decentralized everything versus now it's centralized system. So how you would still have that implemented in blockchain?
No, it's a great debate. So I'll give you a short answer now, but the long answer is tomorrow. And I'm being serious. So we're presenting on Libra, Facebook's cryptocurrency and blockchain network. So we're presenting an analysis on that tomorrow at Tag North Metro. So this is a big part of that debate. So I would encourage you to come there and get to the longer and sort of nitty-gritty part of it. So there, I look at this whole scenario in 3 different ways. One is, let's talk about the technology itself, and let's talk about regulatory issues, and then let's talk about consumers and what we want as a society, right? So 3 different things. The technology, it's like a car. Car is a technology stack. Car functions the way the car is designed. It goes from point A to point B because there is a driver behind it. The car itself has no opinion on the morality or the spirituality or the non-criminality or criminality of the so-called driver. The car doesn't care. The car is designed to do what the car does. So that's how I see technology as a basic tool, right? It's designed to transfer, and not transfer is even a fancier term. It's designed to create blocks and confirm blocks and then publish blocks and then continue the chain. It's just normal process of what it does. Now, there are governments, we have nations, we have sovereign states. So they put boundaries around what we can or cannot do, right? And I agree with those boundaries. As a citizen, I agree with X number of laws in that certain country. So what you will see happening is, it started as a very anarchist movement. Bitcoin was as much as a peer-to-peer cash, digital cash transaction system. It was also censorship resistant. It was also borderless, right? Which is a threat to a lot of border-oriented applications that we have in the world. So, and they, granted, they have been uses of it that are not legal, but certainly. So I think what's happening is countries have developed now or are in the process of developing clarity around how they're going to treat these kind of technologies. And if you just talk about the United States and if you just talk about basic cryptocurrencies, we now have exchanges that comply with all the money transmitter laws and all the KYC AML laws in the United States. Look at Coinbase, a few other exchanges that require you to prove your identity and require you to do the same things any other bank would do, right? So I think governments will be able to monitor and control in certain ways the use of these technologies in the areas that they feel is necessary, and rightly so, right? Now let's talk about it as a society. We'll get into a lot more of this tomorrow, but we are now getting into an era of private currency. Did you know, by the way, this is interesting, I was just writing this paper, so this is on top of my mind, and since we're here, did you know that not too long ago, I'm trying to remember what dates, around 1800, banks could actually issue their own currency. Did you know that? There are about, I think my numbers are right, there are about 3,500 private currencies today existing in the world at the moment, in 2019. So the point I'm making is that there was a time when banks would issue currency with government would not back it, the current system. So what that means is that we've had this history of private currency, right? Not a sovereign state-backed currency. I think with Libra's announcement and then China coming out and saying, hey, we will put out a state-backed cryptocurrency, and then Russia saying, hey, we are next, and then Telegram wants to put out theirs, we are now starting an arms race of private, cryptographically secure blockchain-based currencies and state-backed, cryptographically secure blockchain-based currencies. That's the world we are going to live in. We will have multiple of these currencies. Within the next 10 years, you will see them. Within the next 20 years, they will be as common as, I don't know, PayPal today. So that's the shift or evolution in technology that has led to this question, open question to society: how do we deal with it? And there will be some countries that will have more liberal, more friendly approach, more friendly regulatory framework and routines for such technologies, and there are ones that will have more conservative ones, depending on where they lie on that spectrum. Does that help?
So basically, you still have a regulatory system around on top of the free distribution system. Now,
Yeah, that's one of the main concerns with Libra. France and Germany said, we will not allow a private currency. Switzerland said, well, come on over. You can open your shop over here. We like you. So we can play for just a few minutes blockchain bingo. So tell me an industry and I'll tell you use case. It just helps you grasp the idea better.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes, please.
Since you're saying everyone can see the transaction, what about privacy? If I don't want, three of us here, a group of us are doing a transaction, I don't want the entire world in my business. This is a private
Fair
transaction.
question.
that I
So,
wanna
yeah,
have.
but they won't know it's you.
Yeah.
You
How-
have your
right, how
own,
do-
digital
protect the individual.
item, right?
Yeah. So the answer lies in the type of implementation. So there are both the options. There are options of, I could publish on this wall and everybody else could see, or let's take it further. how about just because the three of us want to do business together? Let's say we are business partners, right? As in the example of supply chain, the watermelon. Let's say there are 8 business partners that want to do business together. We don't want to share our data with anybody else, but we do want to share some data with the 8 of us. So you could design a more, what we would call a private implementation of blockchain versus a public one. Public one would be examples that we used before, like Bitcoin or Ethereum are public chains. You could design a private chain where only the designated parties are part of the network and only they can read or write transactions. You can even go further and say, you can read these transactions but cannot write these. You can write these but cannot read these. You can have all combinations there. And so the answer, it depends on the architecture, depends on the use case, depends on the parties involved. Not all implementations are the same. This is another confusing thing that happens a lot. When you hear about blockchain, blockchain is a foundational technology, as I said. But each implementation in the way it's used is very different. So blockchain for, let's say, authenticating art would be very different than blockchain for supply chain of diamonds. If you want diamonds example, look at Everledger. It's one of the most successful blockchain companies. They track diamonds from mines in Africa, and the use case is that they want to prove that it's not a blood diamond. So they have software all along the diamond cutting process in each one of the steps, and they get automated data most of the time, so that data is just uploaded, and by the time you're buying the diamond, you can find all that detailed information, and even perhaps pay a higher retail price for such a diamond.
How about like fake that data?
Which
Then
part?
You said you can create a ledger for the process. You can create a ledger for physical elements, right? But then what about cyber attacks? And I can fake the process. I can fake the diamond. So that you think you buy the real diamond, but actually bought fake one. Is that possible?
Yeah. So think of it this way: blockchain alone is not enough. Meaning, blockchain is a system of record, right? We will have other technologies that align with it in a full technology stack. So here's how it will look. All the data transfer would be on a secure chain at the base layer. Then we will have some level of IoT systems, sensors that are giving us true data, and we believe the sensors are producing the data that we need at that time. In terms of diamond, we have advanced AI technologies, machine learning technologies now that can actually tell you if the diamond is fake or not. So that is recorded from the point of origin. Right? In a very similar example as the fish, it's recorded from the point of origin, and now you could, even with crude diamonds, and you can tell you more probably, I'm not an expert, but you could tell that this diamond is of this kind, and it has these grades, and it has these kind of characteristics. I think they track over 200 characteristics of a diamond. So it becomes harder and harder to fake along the process.
Basically, you have to have a signature for wherever you are trapped.
Yes.
That's right.
That's the difficult part. How do you create the signature? How do you monitor the signature along the way when you are transferring goods or something?
Yeah, so I think the question there to look for it would be, how do you produce the first authentic record? Then I trust the chain, so I know the next record would be authentic. But how do I prove the first authentic record? So going back to the diamond example, how do I prove that this first instance of the diamond when I'm recording is an authentic instance? Or even, let's take a more esoteric example. Let's say that this is a Van Gogh painting. Well, how do I know it's a genuine, authentic Van Gogh painting? I have to prove that first, and then I can put the painting on the chain, so to say, and then I can trust my cryptography and distributed ledger to maintain that authenticity of data along the way. But I do have to prove the first instance of authenticity. And for that, we will use technologies like AI, video, etc.
But it's really hard to kind of, like, to add on to that, it depends on the fake diamond, right? There's so many advanced fake diamonds out there now. when I first got into the rough diamond business, I actually bought a small parcel from Sierra Leone, and I did the testing and everything, and it came out positive, and it was good. I brought it back to my dad's friend, who's a cutter here in Atlanta, and I showed it to him, and he was like, "It looks great," and so I had a buyer waiting in New York, and this is right from the beginning, and I told him, "Okay, great, cut it. Let me know when it's done." The next day he calls me and he's like, "Jay, you got to come in." It's like, okay, well, it didn't sound right, and I went in and all my diamonds were red. And I couldn't understand why it was red. And he said he took one of the stones and he started grinding it, and because of the heat, it turned red. So I mean that's it depends on the fake diamond, and that was I think the fake diamonds are getting more and more advanced, but you can't etch a barcode on these types of fake diamonds. So it'll be pretty difficult to do so. The technology these days, I think it's hard to kind of do that now.
Yes.
Question on each block. Right? Each block, I guess, you have an X, you can make it public so everybody can see, or you can make it a private, only you control who can see. Is that correct?
Not exactly. But
Even
what's
though
the
the
question?
block is on the wall.
Yeah, I'll explain. So, it's not each block that you can make private or public. It's the entire chain. So, let's take two separate examples. Let's talk about first Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a blockchain that anybody could download software for and run on your computer, which is then called a node. So anybody can create or run a node. You don't need anybody's permission. You don't need the government's permission or God's permission or anybody's permission to start a node. What that means is when you download the software, you agree by downloading the software and by running it that you are agreeing to the set of rules that the software has created or software implements. Right? Now what that means is that anybody has the right to run this. So we have a set of nodes, and hence this is a public chain, because any node could then read the set of transactions that are coming through, and then has the potential or the choice to publish for the transactions. That's a public chain. Now let's talk about another way. Going back to watermelons, I had 8 supply chain partners, and only 8 I would not let anybody else in. So we 8 set up those nodes. Only, let's say each one of us set up 5 nodes each. So we have 5 multiplied by 8 nodes, and each of these nodes could do certain things, which is confirm transactions, etc. But it's a closed system in a way. If I went and said, listen guys, I want to be a node, they'll say, well, no, sorry, you can't be. These are the only 8 participants in the network, and each one of them have 5 nodes, and that's it. That's a private chain, right? So now, let's go further. As far as a
You set
transaction,
that up at the beginning?
huh?
You set that up at the
Exactly,
beginning?
exactly. That's the architecture you design. Going back to your use case, right? There is value in a public chain, and there is certain value in a private chain. Depending on the use case, depending on the parties involved, you design that. Now, there are opinions that are varied on both sides. The people who like public chains say everything should be on a public chain. The people who like private chains say everything on a private chain. So I won't get into that debate, but architecturally, this is possible to do. Does that make sense?
Another concern is Bitcoin is different from everything else you were talking about, because Bitcoin itself is the block, is the chain, that's the digital currency that's traveling around the network. But any other goods you identify, they are separate from the blockchain data itself, because they are goods that you have to transport physically from place to place. And to be able to do that, not only initially you have to have a way of authenticating, identify the goods. Also, when you are transporting and doing exchanges, just publishing and sending the blockchain data, it doesn't help moving the goods along the way, along with the blockchain. Because they're two separate things.
What kind of,
so
what
what's
kind
the
of products?
question?
Yeah.
So my question is, it's unrealistic to do the goods or not unrealistic, just not safe as you think they are. Because you can obviously, you can send the blockchain data, whatever you want to do, the transactions you're reporting to whatever. But the goods are lagging or not, they're detached from the actual data.
Yeah, so I think I follow the challenge there. The goods are not detached from the actual data. The goods are not detached from the actual data. Here's how. So let's take an example of the watermelon, right?
Mhm.
So, and I actually tell you a real use case actually. Forget the watermelon. So there is a application I just saw recently of gathering leaves, tea leaves, and even coffee. So this is in Central America, where the local tribal community goes around and gathers these leaves or even coffee beans, depending on where they are. So they now have baskets that have IoT sensors in them. And the IoT sensors know what is the weight of the basket, how many leaves go in it, what's the temperature. They actually have sensors in the soil. So we are recording the life cycle of the plant itself, right, which is data, nothing more. Let's say every 4 hours I record what's the temperature, what's the climatic conditions, what's the water table in the soil, what kind of plant it is, how much fertilizer has it received, how much water has it received, etc., etc. All that is just data. And then there is a certain time of harvesting. You record in using IoT sensors. When you're plucking the leaves, you're putting them in the basket. So now you know the basket is full. This basket then is recorded. Then it's gotten to the next stage, which is the drying phase. So they have these dryers where, again, there are IoT sensors that record the data. So the point I'm making is the physical goods have a certain set of processing that they go through, and we can associate data with it. So you're creating a chain of, or a set of records which are related or connected or representative or encompassing the physical object. So as I said, blockchain alone is not enough. The interesting part is that this data is then stored onto the chain, and it's transferred or shared easily because it's a shared network amongst the parties. Does that make sense?
Right, that's the best scenario, yes. You can ensure the goods for what they are and then follow the process. But it's easy to manipulate it so you can swap the goods without changing the data. And who is there to ensure the identity of that? You sealed container with barcode, with whatever.
I think the question maybe is just like manufacturing, you have ISO 2000, you have these processes, certification groups that certify this process. Like manufacturing, you can manufacture anything, you can make it, this thing is junk, you can sell it, say this is a so-called product. But if you're ISO 2000 certified, then people trust you. If you're not, then people don't trust you.
Yeah.
Same process, I'm sure there's going to be some kind of that, right? Am I correct?
Yeah, I mean, that's
some kind
essentially.
of quality process control in place.
Yeah, so the idea comes back to trust. Let's say you did that. Let's say you did what you just said. You swapped goods and now you're setting up fake goods. Well, how much do you think the buyer will trust you? Okay, it can happen one time. Will it happen the next time? Will it happen the time after? Will the industry trust you? That becomes the question. So it is, so ironically, blockchain is the answer for trust in a trustless environment. So what we're really saying is, don't trust an individual. Don't even trust a company. Trust the data on the chain. Once it's on the chain, it cannot be changed or altered or removed, right? And then, because of that, we create this hierarchy of trust or this web of trust. And yes, obviously, there are opportunities to manipulate, but how long will that survive in such an environment, right? And in most of the chains have, if you really want to go into more nitty-gritty, if you talk about Bitcoin per se or any cryptocurrencies or most public chains, there are things in there called consensus mechanism. So consensus mechanism is a way to prove that this transaction that is being published or minted is authentic or not. And there is a specific algorithm, and I can go into much more detail at some other time, but the idea is if there is a node that's giving incorrect or manipulated data, the node is compromised. So the chain is smart enough, so to say, to recognize that the node is compromised and this data is incorrect, and we will not propagate this malicious data, and we will cut this malicious node out of the network. Right? So there are mechanisms built for that. When you set up a blockchain network, you are agreeing to the consensus mechanism as the group has decided. Right? So if you were to do this in your private chain with the 8 parties involved, you are agreeing to a set of consensus mechanism. For instance, if you say, hey, listen, if this 4 sensors go bad for more than 4 hours, I will not accept data from this node. Done. This node is out of my network. And there's no negotiation, there's no discussion, there's no if but then else. This is the consensus mechanism. These are the rules of the game that we are establishing ourselves. And that's how you develop that trust. You said had a question.
No. You already answered the question. Basically, it's like who safeguard the blockchain. You already answered.
Yeah. So the honest, if you look at the innovation here, the innovation here is not merely in technology. The innovation here is also in governance models. So
My company will be a node, right?
Could be, yes.
A unique node that people recognize as a brand, as a representation.
Right.
Anything come out of a company will be with a certain quality, certain associated with it, right?
correct. Yeah. And if you are malicious within the network will cut you off.
So I can't create multiple nodes and
In a private chain environment, which is what I think you're referring to, no. You would have agreed to what the architecture is, what the set of nodes are, what the consensus mechanism and governance protocols are, etc. And then everybody plays by those rules.
So basically, the data that's here should match the data over here, should match the data over here. So anywhere along that chain, the data chain is then something is wrong. That's basically what you're saying. So for the melons, or whatever, you're moving the melon along. That melon weighs 5 pounds. It shouldn't weigh 6 pounds over here on the data. It should still be 5 pounds.
Right. So I wouldn't use the term matches because it depends on the context of what this is. But let's say the data needs to be authentic. Right? There are ways to, if there are aberrations, the network will find that out and cut that node out. So in the case of melons, maybe there is processing happening. Maybe the melon did weigh 5 pounds and then it went through sun and now it weighs 4.5 pounds. But I have sensor-based data that says that, okay, there was this temperature difference.
There'd be tracking data along the way that
Correct.
says, okay, from here to here it's gonna lose 2 pounds of water.
Right,
So it should weigh this
Right.
at this point.
right, exactly. It depends on the context, right? Good. Any burning desires?
which one will be next Bitcoin when there's 10 years ago, like the 10 cents, now the $7,000.
Yeah, so let me speak to that. A lot of us have heard about blockchain in the context of cryptocurrency. So I want to put out 2 basic ideas. One is blockchain is not cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency is not blockchain. That's chapter number 1 in my education programs. Chapter number 2 is what you see as value on an exchange for any of these what, 2,000 cryptocurrencies now. That's a speculative instrument. I'm not as much interested in determining the value as much as I'm interested in the underlying technology that enables this transfer. So you can go, as a disclaimer, I'm not a financial advisor, I'm not a lawyer, and any advice that I give you is not to be construed as such. Ajay is smiling because he is a lawyer. So I say that in all of my, yeah, exactly. So the point of the story is these are speculative instruments, and I have my own investments in there, and so do a lot of other people. No harm, no foul. But that is not the field that we're playing in. We're talking about technology and architecture, business and governance. We're not talking about speculative instruments where you could make a lot of money or lose a lot of money. So I view it as such. It's a very unregulated investment environment. It's suitable for some people. Some people want to take that risk, and some people don't. It's your choice.
So, but from your insights so deep, so you can feel when the the Yahoo and Google, when the Google company is so small, but you feel you can see the Google is the future. From now, you see maybe that currency is cheaper, less power consumption. Maybe that can be a next Bitcoin. But from you know the technology is so deep. You see much deeper than other people, so you can have some insight maybe.
So that's the other class. Then.
Okay.
So I'll answer it this way. We do, and we published a paper last year where we started to ask the question, why do blockchain companies fail, and hence why do they succeed? Any blockchain project, which includes a lot of these cryptocurrencies. So we designed a model because we were just a bunch of PhDs and geeks. I'm not a PhD, but we had a few in the team that designed this model, 6-dimension, 32 criteria, qualitative, quantitative. We just all went nerded out on it. The point of the story there is that we are looking at certain dimensions, certain factors that make a certain blockchain company successful versus some other blockchain companies that are not successful. And there's plenty of examples of the not successful ones. So if you dabble in the crypto space, I challenge you to look at cryptocurrencies that were around 5 years ago or 4 years ago and tell me how many are actually around today. Right? So what is the difference? And if you read the paper, you might find some indicators of how to ascertain what's a better project versus not so good project. But we take a very sort of rational, business-oriented approach to that versus a speculative or even I have friends who do financial analysis, technical analysis, etc. So I don't go into that direction. More like an equities trader, we look at fundamentals and we say, okay, this is a project we think one should invest in, and this is a project we think we shouldn't invest in. So feel free to check that paper out. All right, I think we feel satiated, satisfied, or there's more.
I think
For
the
now.
word is very good. It's like people's money, since no boundary, right? It's not like the dollar or
Exactly.
pound, right? It's
I want to leave one thing with you guys. I think if you look at your industry and see what the process is from beginning to end, and see how many different steps there are in fulfilling whatever your business is, I think you can kind of get an understanding or grasp of where blockchain can help you.
Mhm.
Good point. I think if you look at it that way, you can save a lot of money. You might be able to do some transactions a lot faster. And so just think about that.
Yeah, give us a call.
Yeah.
Yes.
Where do you see the next hurdle is for blockchain to move forward?
There's a few. Yeah, I said we'll talk about challenges and risks. We never got to that point. So the technology itself, he mentioned smart contracts. We didn't really get into that discussion. So let's talk about blockchain networks and smart contracts. Blockchain networks are in their adolescence. You have to track the maturity of a child born, and then smart contracts are in their diapers. So these technologies are not as mature as they will be in a few years. We are going through the maturity or evolution phase. There's a lot of innovation happening, a lot of new technologies or new distinct technologies coming out within the space. So we will improve. There are still a lot of regulatory hurdles. My opinion is that in terms of digital assets and in terms of even cryptocurrency, in terms of how we treat these digital assets, there needs to be more clarity on regulatory aspects, especially from the federal government and different agencies of the federal government. And I would even go to say that the lack of clarity is hurting U.S. competitiveness. There are other countries that are much more aggressive, much more educated, much more adopted, much more clear on how they want to deal with this. And the United States is not. It's somewhere in the middle. It's not over there. It's not as conservative as some other countries. It's somewhere over there. I actually wrote an article on that last year called "One Country's Ban in Another Country's Boom." So we will see mass-scale economic development. And to that point, Jay brought this up earlier. So I'll just mix in a few announcements here. So I'm part of TAG, Technology Association of Georgia, and we are now launching a blockchain society for TAG. We started with a task force. It did amazingly well in the last 1 year or so. And then we are presenting, in fact, this month, to the state legislators here in Georgia to help them understand the space and also to have some favorable regulations, favorable environment, climate for blockchain-based companies in the state of Georgia. God knows how long that will take, or even if it will happen. But we are making the case very similar to Wyoming or very similar to Arizona's sandbox, etc. So there are cases now or case studies that you can look at and model yourself on. So we're moving forward with that. So regulatory clarity is a risk, and it'll continue to be a risk till we get to a world. I think the world itself will shift. People will move to friendly environments, and we've seen that happen. The other risk is, this is more on the business side, on the corporate, big company side. The question that's asked a lot of times, do enterprises need blockchain or does blockchain need enterprise? My view is, think about that again. Do enterprises need blockchain or blockchain needs enterprise? What do you think?
Oh.
Well, my view is blockchain is going to survive with or without enterprise. There is a lot of disruption happening. I believe more in disruption than status quo. So there are a lot of companies out there that are trying to change the world, and they will succeed. I believe there is a risk in lack of understanding of use cases and how it could be applied, how the ecosystem is shifting in big companies. So slowly we see larger corporations planting a flag and saying, yes, blockchain is good and good for us. For instance, FedEx CEO last year said, if you're not innovating with blockchain in the supply chain space, you will be dead, period. So there are bigger public companies, larger companies, executives that are making these kinds of statements. UPS is one of them, Amazon, Google, now Facebook, you see all of these, they're making that stance. But there are a lot of other companies that are not clear on how they could employ or deploy this technology. They're not clear on transformative aspects of this technology. So that to me is a big risk. And then the last risk is actually workforce. So there is so much demand for blockchain engineers. Do you know how many jobs are available to one blockchain engineer who may or may not be good? There are 24 jobs available today for that one individual. So there's a lot more demand than there is supply.
What is a blockchain engineer?
Somebody who can design these protocols or code in smart contracts, which is different from, let's say, coding in Java or C++, although you still use some of those, learning some of those technologies. But people who are engineers, who create these protocols, create these applications, create these smart contracts.
Which college is the best in your field?
I'd be biased to say, because I work with multiple different universities, but here's the answer. Blockchain education itself is being revolutionized. So there's a report that came out by Coinbase, I think, top 50 universities in blockchain and crypto education. It's everywhere, right? And it's actually more prevalent outside the United States, although there's it's getting more and more traction in the United States. Just as an aside, we are about to launch a blockchain education company in partnership with a Canadian company next year. So we see a lot of demand in this space, be it training executives, be it training architects, be it training engineers, be it training business managers like some of you here. We see demand in a lot of different verticals. So blockchain education is a field that will grow itself.